Namaskar to the August gathering of the Academy of Comparative Philosophy and Religion. And thank you to the organizers of ACPR and ICPR New Delhi for inviting me to present my paper. I'm very honored and delighted to be talking to you all. My paper today is called Mysticism Through the Lens of Comparative Philosophy, Insights from R.D. Ranade's Writings. R.T. Ranade, or as we know him as Gurudev Ranade, was a renowned Indian philosopher and a spiritual teacher, a Vice Chancellor of Allahabad University, and the head of Adhyatma Vidyapit at Nimbarg in Karnataka. He made significant contributions to comparative philosophy, especially in reconciling Indian and Western philosophical insights. His works and teachings revolved around mysticism, metaphysics, ethics, and bhakti, which he approached with a spirit of synthesis. In this article, we'll explore how Ranade describes mysticism, a central pillar of his spiritual philosophy, and review the concept through comparative philosophy to argue its universal and timeless nature. What is mysticism? Ranade notes that mysticism denotes that attitude of mind which involves a direct, immediate, first-hand, intuitive apprehension of God. Mysticism is a philosophy or realization or enjoyment of God in silence. He describes it as the summum bonum of Upanishadic philosophy and the highest spiritual experience possible for a human being. It goes beyond intellectual comprehension and embraces an intuitive encounter with the abstract nirgun divine by combining intellect, feeling, and will. For Ranade, mysticism is a result of meditation and bhakti. It's central to one's spiritual life and is the highest form of knowledge and realization. A seer witnesses mystical intuition or vision through Jnana Chakshu, the inner eye of wisdom, which transcends the limitations of sensory perception and intellectual analysis. This mystical intuition develops through spiritual discipline, ethical living, and devotion with a sense of surrender, eventually culminating in direct experience of the divine. Mysticism is not a passive state, but an active engagement with the divine, seeking to realize unity with the ultimate reality, which he describes as an asymptotic union with the divine in one's lifetime and becomes unified at the end of one's life. Ranade's philosophy synthesized the idea of mysticism described in the ancient Indian philosophical texts such as Vedas, Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita, but more precisely in the Advaita Vedanta school, which talks about Brahman as nirgun or without qualities, an abstract concept. Ranade also talks about the Western philosophers like Plato and Kant, as well as Christian mystics like Plotinus, Meister Eckhart, about their spiritual experiences, about the absolute, and draws parallels showing the homogeneity in their experiences. Ranade's comparative study of mysticism was more than just academic. Still, it was rooted in experiential and existential understanding, which enabled him to call it a rational mysticism. The rational aspect of this mysticism ensures validity and the legitimacy of this experience and rejects the confusion with any hallucination or disillusionment. The second pillar of this conversation is about the ethical preparation for mystical experience. For Ranade and his gurus, ethics forms the foundation for mystical experience. Ethical conduct, grounded in self-discipline, truthfulness, a sense of detachment, selflessness, and surrender, purifies the soul and prepares it for mystical realization. According to Ranade, the soul becomes receptive to divine grace only through the practice of moral virtues. Ethical behavior is both the pathway to and the outcome of mystical experience. In the Bhagavad Gita, this connection between ethics and mysticism becomes apparent through the teachings of Nishkama Karma, or selfless action, and Swadharma, one's duty. The Gita advises that by performing one's duty selflessly, without attachment to the fruits of action, one aligns with the divine will. The ethical self-discipline leads to inner purity, which is necessary for spiritual awakening. Similarly, in Stoicism, ethical behavior is rooted in living according to nature, which involves recognizing and acting per universal reason. The Stoic sage exemplifies this ethical ideal, living a life of virtue, self-control, and detachment from the vicissitudes of fortune. The Stoic commitment to apatheia parallels Gita's notion of detachment from the outcomes of actions. Ranade's emphasis on ethics aligns with Immanuel Kant's notion of the moral imperative. For Kant, ethical action results from the categorical imperative, a universal moral law that one must follow out of respect for duty, independent of personal inclinations or outcomes. Ranade's understanding of mystical experience resonates with the Stoic ideal of self-realization and harmony with nature. The Stoics emphasize living in accordance with nature not as a passive acceptance, but as an active alignment with the rational order of the universe, or logos. The Stoic sage known as sapiens, like the sage of the Bhagavad Gita known as Siddhaprajna, Yogi, or Jivan Mukta, is someone who has transcended personal desires and emotions, achieving a state of inner tranquility through wisdom and virtue. The Stoic and Gita's sage exhibit an ideal ethical and mystical stance rooted in harmony with the divine. Now, the third pillar of this conversation is about epistemological understanding of mysticism. In epistemology, Ranade's philosophy asserts that true knowledge of ultimate reality comes through direct mystical experience. One understands it through pratyaksha pramana, and the knowledge comes from shabda, words from scriptures, anumana, inference, and upamana, comparison, pramanas. This mystical knowledge is available to a seer through direct perception. It is initially introduced through the words of scriptures and taught through anumana, knowing how to infer its validity while using upamana, comparing it with the information from the other seers. Ranade insists that the highest form of knowledge arises when the jnana chakshu, the inner eye of wisdom, awakens through spiritual practice, devotion, contemplation, and meditation. The ultimate validity test of such an experience is whether one can see a mystical vision through eyes open or closed, or taste the nectar without eating or drinking anything. For Ranade, mystical knowledge is immediate, non-conceptual, ineffable, intuitive, unifying, and transformative. It is difficult to explain logically in words because it transcends dualities such as subject and object. Ranade's mystical epistemology is parallel to the Stoic epistemology of oikaiosis, or the process of coming into accord with one's true nature and the nature of the universe. For the Stoics, knowledge is not just a theoretical understanding, but a form of practical wisdom that aligns one's actions with the cosmic order. The Stoic sage attains knowledge through deep meditation on the nature of reality, like the jnani or knower in the Advaita tradition, who realizes their oneness with Brahman. In both Ranade's and Stoic philosophy, knowledge is a transformative experience. Like the mystic in Ranade's philosophy, the Stoic sage transcends ordinary perceptions and understands the unity of all things. This form of knowledge is not separate from ethical living, but is, in fact, realized through the cultivation of virtue and wisdom. Nevertheless, Stoics consider it merely ethical freedom, whereas Ranade's understanding brings one closer to spiritual liberation or moksha. Now, the fourth pillar in this conversation is the fruits of mystical realization, which are compassion, bliss, and sublime. For Ranade, the outcome of mystical realization is threefold: the cultivation of compassion, karuna, the sense of bliss, ananda, and the experience of sublime, adbhut. Mystical experience naturally leads to an outpouring of sympathy for all beings. As one realizes the unity and divinity of the soul that lives in oneself and others, one's heart opens to the suffering and joy of others, fostering sympathy, fostering empathy and selfless service. Secondly, the mystical experience, be it audio, visual, taste, touch, aroma, kind, excites the mind with the idea of blessedness and blissfulness, resulting in joy. Thirdly, Ranade describes the notion of the sublime as containing both joy and fear. Like the experience of Arjuna witnessing his favorite Krishna in his Bhagwan form and realizing that Krishna occupies the whole space from the ground to the sky and is the supremo of the universe, bringing Arjuna to his knees and asking the Lord to return to his human form. Other examples from nature are earthquakes or volcanoes, which are both fearful and beautiful at the same time. The Siddha Prajna of the Gita remains balanced in joy and sorrow, detached from material concerns and compassionate toward all. Like the Gita, the Stoic sage experiences a profound sense of inner peace and joy by realizing their alignment with the Logos, the rational principle of the universe. The Stoic commitment to virtue and reason leads to a life of eudaimonia, which is flourishing or happiness, which is not dependent on external circumstances but arises from living in accordance with nature. The sense of inner tranquility and joy follows a compassionate and just approach to others, as the Stoic recognizes all human beings' shared rationality and interconnectedness. Ranade's concept of bliss also aligns with Kant's notion of summum bonum, where moral virtue leads to happiness. In Kant's framework, the highest good is when ethical living and happiness converge. Compassion and bliss are the natural fruits of mystical realization in both traditions. Whether in the Gita, Stoicism, or Ranade's thought, the sage attains ethical perfection, inner joy, and universal compassion, reflecting their profound understanding of the divine unity that pervades all existence. This brings us to the conclusion of this article. R.T. Ranade's philosophy of mysticism offers a rich comparative approach to understanding the intersection of mysticism, ethics, epistemology, compassion, and bliss. Drawing from Indian spiritual traditions, particularly the Bhagavad Gita and Advaita Vedanta, as well as resonances with Stoicism and Kantian ethics, Ranade presents a holistic vision of the mystical path. His mysticism was a synthetical understanding of ancient texts and has had global applicability. For Ranade, mystical experience is not an isolated pursuit, but a transformative process that shapes the ethical, intellectual, and emotional dimension of the self. The realization of ultimate reality brings knowledge, a deep sense of compassion, and enduring bliss, reflecting the unity of all beings in the divine. Thank you, and God bless you. Jai Shri Gurudev.